On behalf of the Environmental Studies program, I want to welcome you to the second event of the Environmental Citizenship Speaker Series this year. I'm Barry Muchnick. I'm a proud faculty member of the Environmental Studies program and the director of the Environmental Citizenship Speaker Series. Thanks to interest in and support from across the college, we're in our third year of successful events, inviting esteemed scientists, scholars, policymakers, practitioners, entrepreneurs, and innovators to campus to help curate a community-wide conversation about citizenship, nature, and democracy. A conversation that spans the sciences, social sciences, arts, and humanities. The series explores the connections between stewardship and society by analyzing and asking questions of human and nature interactions. How does our relationship to nature, our ideas about the natural world, shape our notions of rights and responsibilities, of the behaviors associated with citizenship, with justice, with participation in civic life? What are the obstacles to and opportunities for integrating sustainability and civil society? And tonight especially, what is the role of science and technology in shaping or influencing our thinking or behavior in that regard? If you would like information about the series or upcoming speakers or events, if you would please be sure to sign in. Colin, would you just hold up that clipboard? Colin's got a clipboard. Please weave it through the crowd. And if you're interested, add your name and email, and we will make sure that you're added to our listserv so you receive a notification. If you're here as part of a participation grade for a class, in the right-hand column, put the initials of your professor. Okay? A few quick acknowledgments before I introduce tonight's speaker. I want to thank the Lecture in Fine Arts Committee, the Environmental Studies Steering Committee, the Democracy Studies program, and others for their financial support of the series. I'd also like to recognize Sandy Robbins, the folks at the Media Center, for all their behind-the-scenes work to make sure things run smoothly and are recorded for posterity. Last but not least, I'd like to give a shout-out of appreciation to our intrepid ENST program assistants, led by our professional fellow, Jillian Sawyer. That team includes Grace DeOro, Ashley Simmons, Melanie Kimball. Thanks to you all for your fearless flyering and tenacious table tenting early this morning. What are some of the ways that we imagine environmentalists are good citizens? Open question. How are environmentalists good citizens?
Vote for the environment.
Vote for the environment, Andrew says. Actually, it turns out that environmentalists are terrible voters. It's kind of a surprise. You think we're out there doing good for the public interest, but in fact, we are terrible voters. In the 2014 midterm elections, almost 16 million die-hard, self-identified, self-declared environmentalists did not vote in those midterm elections. In 2012, 10.1 million die-hard, self-identified environmentalists did not vote in the presidential election. So it turns out that we're not good voters and that there's a big environmental voter turnout problem. But our speaker tonight saw this as a tremendous opportunity. The Environmental Voter Project harnesses the power of publicly available big data to turn environmental non-voters into consistent environmental super voters. Nathaniel Stinnett is the project's founder and CEO. He has over a decade's experience as a senior advisor, consultant, and trainer for political campaigns and issue advocacy nonprofits. He was dubbed last year the voting guru by Grist magazine and named as one of the top 50 environmental visionaries of 2016. He's held a variety of senior leadership and campaign manager positions on Senate, congressional, all the way to state and mayoral campaigns. Formerly an attorney at the international law firm of DLA Piper LLP, he's also widely recognized for his work on land use, environmental, and real estate law. Nathaniel holds a BA from Yale University and a JD from Boston College Law School. Please welcome me in, or join me in welcoming Nathaniel to St. Mary's College.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much, Barry. It is such a joy to be here. I'm sure you guys are sick of having people tell you how beautiful your campus is, but your campus is really stunning. Like, it is so cool to be here. Thank you all for coming. I'm gonna chat with you for maybe about 40, 45 minutes, and then we're gonna leave lots of time for Q&A. Some of the stuff I'm gonna go over is probably pretty new to some of you, and I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, and I'm not going to. I'm going to touch on some stuff, hopefully tease you with some things that you might find interesting, and then we can go into some more detail during the question and answer period. I'm going to talk about three things tonight. I'll start by talking about the work we do at the Environmental Voter Project. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that just focuses on one thing. We find environmentalists who don't vote, and then we apply the latest behavioral science to turn them into consistent voters. I'm going to tell you the story about why we do this work and how we got started, but not because tonight should be about this nonprofit that I run, but rather it's a good introduction to the next two things that I want to talk about, which are important not just for people who care about the environment, but also just for people who want to understand modern political campaigns. I'm sure you are painfully aware of the fact that there's an election coming up in 6 days. But politics has been completely revolutionized over the past 4 years. And chances are, many of you aren't aware how very sophisticated political campaigns now individually target people according to the issues they care about or the candidates they support, and then apply certain really finely tested messages to get those people out the door on election day. So those are the two other things I'm going to chat about. The second thing will be, how do we at the Environmental Voter Project identify environmentalists? And as Barry mentioned, we use a lot of big data and predictive modeling to individually identify people who care about the environment but don't vote. And then we get them to the polls. And so this entire discussion is going to be about what we do at EVP, how we find environmentalists, and how we get them to vote. But hopefully we'll get into some bigger picture things, which is how our modern sophisticated political campaigns, like the current presidential campaigns, individually targeting folks and then getting them to vote. Because there's some really, really interesting, counterintuitive, and kind of like scary and Orwellian stuff that's going on that hopefully will be of interest to you. So we'll start with the Environmental Voter Project. As I said, we are a nonprofit. We don't try to help certain candidates win. We just try to address the environmental voter turnout problem. And I'll tell you how we got there. As Barry mentioned, I've worked on campaigns for over a decade, campaigns big and small. And something always made me want to put my head through a wall. And it's something that some of you might be aware of, if not painfully aware of. And that's this. When you poll likely voters in any election, whether it's a presidential campaign or a mayoral election in St. Mary's City, You poll likely voters for any election and ask them to list the issues they care most about, climate change and other environmental issues are way, way at the bottom. Way at the bottom. And believe me, that has an enormous impact on how policy is made in the country, but also at the state and local level. Because electing the right people is important. But no matter who you elect, whether they are a great environmentalist or an awful environmentalist, how much do you think is going to get done if voters don't care about environmental issues? I mean, the greatest environmental politician in the world is not going to stick her neck out and spend her political capital on something that voters don't prioritize. We just did a poll about a month ago, I think, maybe 2 months ago now, of voters who are likely to vote in the upcoming presidential election. And I can get into later on how we know these people are likely to vote. We asked them to list their number 1 political priority, which is the dark blue that you see, and their number 2 political priority, which is the lighter blue. Only 4% listed climate change or some other environmental issue as a number 1 or number 2 issue. Only 2%, only 1 out of every 50 people who are going to vote on Tuesday, listed climate change and the environment as their number 1 political priority. Now, it is obviously totally fine to care about a whole bunch of issues and maybe care about them more than climate change and the environment. But my hope is that many of the people in this room will at least admit that climate change is truly an existential threat. This is an extraordinarily important issue, and almost no voters list it among their top 2. And this poll is no different from any other poll that's out there. And this has an enormous impact on how policy is made. Because this is something we all know, we rarely think about it and internalize it. Policy is not made on election day. In fact, it's probably the only day when policy is not made, because no one is doing their job, they're all running for office. Policy is made in the intervening weeks and months and years between election days. And politicians care about what voters care about, or what donors care about. But if voters aren't prioritizing this, it's really hard to expect politicians to. And one of the big reasons is this. Campaigns only target likely voters. I'm going to say this a few times tonight, but if there's only one thing you remember from this presentation, let it be this. Who you vote for is secret, but whether you vote or not is public information. It's public information. For those of you who are registered to vote here, anybody can go down to City Hall, ask the clerk for a copy of the voter file, and see who votes and who skips an election. It's public information. And you better believe that every politician, when they're running for re-election or running for the first time, they start by figuring out who's going to vote and who isn't. And they do that by looking at the public voter file. And how much time do you think they spend talking to folks who never vote? None. None. Listen, I think money is a huge problem in politics, and there's no doubt that it distorts the political process. But compared to everything else going on in your life, political campaigns have very little money. I mean, compared to Apple and Nike and Coca-Cola, all these people competing for your brain space, political campaigns have nothing. Nothing. They have very limited time and very limited money to try to get into voters' heads. And with that limited time and limited money, they are never going to talk to someone who is proven to hardly ever or never vote. They're just not going to do it. And it makes sense. I mean, we were talking earlier today, if you think about Starbucks, do they spend time marketing to people who don't drink coffee? Or is Ford going to try to sell a car to a 3-year-old? No. Politicians care about voters, because voters can help them win elections. So, campaigns only target likely voters, which means they only poll likely voters. First thing you should look at in any poll that pops up on CNN or Politico or whatever sites you go to is, who are they polling? I can guarantee you that campaigns only poll people who are likely to vote. Often newspapers and TV stations just poll whoever the hell they feel like. But campaigns only poll people who are likely to vote. And as a result, likely voters' opinions, consistent voters' opinions, count far more than the opinions of people who don't vote. And so this is bad news for the environment. Because remember that last slide that I showed you. It's not a secret. Any politician who can put a poll in the field knows that voters don't prioritize climate change and other environmental issues. So again, we've got a real problem here, because no matter who we elect, it's really hard to expect that person to spend serious political capital on something that voters don't prioritize. But, there's some good news here. To go back to the story of the Environmental Voter Project, I was doing some research after a campaign that I finished running about 2.5 years ago for a friend of mine who's a national pollster. We just asked him to look over some polls that he does every now and then. And I realized something that totally blew my mind. Totally blew my mind. And that was this. The reason so few voters prioritize climate change and other environmental issues is not because too few Americans care about climate change and other environmental issues. I'll say that again because it's really important. The reason so few voters care about climate change is not because too few Americans care about it. It's just because environmentalists are awful voters. They are awful voters. It turns out there are tens of millions of Americans who deeply care about clean air, clean water, climate change, environmental justice, land conservation. The problem is, they don't vote. They don't vote. Which was really surprising to me and surprising to a lot of people that I brought this information to. Because as I think Barry mentioned, when people think of environmentalists, they, I think, usually imagine people who are very civically engaged. But we found that environmentalists often express themselves in different ways. They express themselves with their purchasing habits, or their eating habits, or their transportation habits. But they rarely express themselves politically. We found 15.78 million super dyed-in-the-wool environmentalists who didn't vote in the 2014 midterm elections. And I'll get into how we did this, but when I say we found them, we know them by name and street address. We know these people. 15.78 million. For some context, only 83 million people voted in the 2014 national midterm elections. As Barry mentioned, in the 2012 presidential election, 10.1 million super environmentalists didn't vote. And again, I'll get into how we can find these people, but we know them. We know them by name and street address. And we are living now at a grand moment in time where we have the tools not only to identify these people, but to get them to the polls. But remember, these aren't environmentalists. These are environmentalists who don't vote. And so if you are a political campaign, and your goal is a short-term one, Your goal is to elect a particular candidate on a Tuesday in November. Well, you rarely have the time or money to talk to these people, because these are bad voters. They're bad voters. And campaigns, as I said, have a really limited amount of time and a really limited amount of money. So not only is the overwhelming majority of environmentalists not voting, but no one even tries to get them to vote. For very good reason. If I am trying to elect a candidate, my goal is not the long-term health of the environmental movement. My goal is to get 50% plus one of the vote on one day. That's it. And the cheapest, best way to get there never, ever involves spending lots of money talking to crappy voters. Never. So we realized, gosh, the overwhelming majority of environmentalists don't vote. But now we know how to find them, and we can get them to vote. But for good reason, campaigns never talk to them. And so what we do with the Environmental Voter Project is we realized there needs to be a rock the vote for environmentalists. There needs to be an organization that actually doesn't care about the short term, doesn't care who wins the next election, but just does the long-term movement building work, not to get people to care more about the environment. There are lots of great groups that already do that. But instead, find the people who already care about it and just tweak their habits a bit and get them to vote a bit more often. And so that's what we do. And what's really special about this is it's so cheap and easy. Because persuading someone who doesn't care about the environment to start caring about it is really hard. Persuading someone who's a climate denier to accept and care about climate change is almost impossible. But finding someone who already deeply cares about those issues and just changing their habits a bit, I'm not going to claim it's easy or cheap, but it's a heck of a lot easier and cheaper. And so that's what we do. If you're an environmentalist who's already a good voter, we never touch you. There are great campaigns and nonprofits that already do that. We find people who are super environmentalists and don't vote, and for every election, we try to push them into the electorate, with the goal being the next time some politician does a poll, which believe me, they do all the time. As I'm talking right now, there must be 200 polls in the field across the country, asking likely voters what issues they care about. The next time a politician does a poll, climate change and the environment will be a little bit higher, a little bit higher, and a little bit higher, and a little bit higher. And eventually, so much demand will be in the marketplace that the people supplying the policy will respond, regardless of who is elected. Because believe me, nothing motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning an election. Nothing. And if you flood the marketplace with a whole bunch of new environmental voters, politicians will respond, or they will lose. So that's the work that we do. Now, how we do it? We use data analytics and predictive modeling, which I'm going to go into right now, to identify people who really care about the environment yet don't vote. If any of them need to be registered, we register them. I'm not going to talk about that today, that's pretty basic. And then we mobilize them. We apply certain behavioral science techniques that I'm going to get into to increase their likelihood of voting. So, let's move on to the second topic, because this is something that not just we do, but it's important as people who care about the environment and as citizens of this country to understand how modern, sophisticated political campaigns are individually targeting people. Individually targeting people. Big data has completely revolutionized politics. Completely revolutionized it. When Barry and I were having lunch today, I said something that I think he'd enjoy. Remember well, many of you probably don't remember 12 years ago, but some of you might remember 12 years ago, the John Kerry campaign. When John Kerry was running against George W. Bush, everybody was talking about soccer moms. Soccer moms was the demographic that was going to swing the election. 4 years later, Barack Obama versus John McCain, it was NASCAR dads, or Joe the plumber. These were the people who were the demographic that was going to swing the election. Anybody have an idea who the swing voters are now? The swing demographic? Don't worry, you don't need to answer because it's a trick question. There isn't one. There isn't one. Big data killed the soccer mom. No campaign for the last 3 or 4 years has targeted a demographic group. Campaigns are targeting you individually. And I'm going to get into how they do it, but I'll start by saying this. Every single one of you has a record in a voter file that's held by a campaign right now, and they have assigned every single one of you a whole bunch of scores. I'm serious. Every single one of you, as long as you're registered to vote. Scores that tell them how likely you are to support Donald Trump, or how likely you are to support Hillary Clinton, or how likely you are to vote, or how likely you are to care about environmental issues. Every single one of you has one of these scores. And I'll go through how they do this. But campaigns are individually targeting people now. Whenever you see some article about a demographic group being targeted, it's just because a journalist doesn't want to go through the time of really understanding how campaigns are targeting folks now. As you see up there, 4 years ago, the data group took up over 1/3 of the Obama campaign's headquarters staff. This is how integral this stuff is to campaigns right now. And it all starts with the voter file. So remember what I said before. I'm going to keep on coming back to this because it's the one thing you need to remember. Who you vote for is secret. Whether you vote or not is public information. Up until about 5 or 6 years ago, if you went to City Hall, you would see what I call sort of the vanilla version of the voter file. It wouldn't have much information on it. It would tell you Barry's name and address and age and gender and party affiliation. And that's about it. That's about it. Now that's enough to help you target him as a demographic group, but it doesn't give you enough really, really good data to really learn who Barry is and what he cares about. Well, starting about 5 or 6 years ago, 2 companies on the liberal Democratic side of politics, and one company in particular on the conservative Republican side, started buying up tons and tons of consumer data. This is the same stuff that you know, like magazines sell as soon as you subscribe to a magazine, right? Like as soon as you buy something online at the Gap, you know that they're going to target you with ads and sell your name and email address to 10 other people. Well, these companies bought up all this purchasing information, consumer information, behavioral information, membership lists, and they appended it to people's records in the voter file. Now you can't go and see this at City Hall, and there are a whole bunch of privacy controls in place. But if you subscribe to a service, you can look up Barry Muchnick and see hundreds and hundreds of data points on him. Now again, tons of privacy controls in place. But this is stuff like what car he just bought, what magazines he subscribes to, a whole bunch of things. 6, 7, sometimes even 800 data points for every individual on the voter file. Now, the next step in trying to identify, in this case, super environmentalists, or in the case of a political campaign, whether you might support a particular candidate, is not to use your gut. I don't assume that because Barry just bought an electric vehicle and subscribes to National Geographic, that he must really care about the environment. Like, I don't know. Maybe he wants to look cool because he just bought an electric vehicle. Like, I don't know. No, the next step is to use this data and build something that's called a predictive model, which is kind of what it sounds like. It's a model that helps you predict something about a particular person. And I know these letters are kind of small. Sorry about that. Before I get into the details on this is similar to what insurance companies do. Most of you probably have not bought life insurance, but you're familiar with it from seeing advertisements on like daytime television. If an insurance company knows that I smoke 2 packs of cigarettes each day, drink a ton, and never exercise and love to go cliff diving, like they're not going to sell me insurance, right? Or it's going to be like super expensive. Insurance companies collect all these data points on people, and they have models that help them figure out, oh man, someone who smokes as much as Nathaniel and dives off cliffs, like, is probably going to die really soon. We need to sell a really expensive policy or something like that. Well, political campaigns do the same thing with this data. And what they do is they build a predictive modeling survey. Predictive modeling survey is like the inverse of your typical poll. Your typical political poll, which some of you are probably familiar with, goes like this. You ask 40 questions of about 600 people, and the information you get back over the phone can only tell you how really broad demographic groups feel about the questions you asked. A predictive modeling survey is the inverse of that. You ask 1 or 2 questions of like 30 or 40,000 people. And I'll give you an example. Oh, but it's important to realize, not just any 30 or 40,000 people. 30 or 40,000 people off one of these data-rich voter files. I'll give you an example of the questions we ask when we build these predictive models. We say, hey, what's your #1 most important political priority? Okay, what's your #2 most important political priority? And let's say out of 40,000 people, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, say climate change or clean air or environmental justice or open space, some environmental issue. It is then the easiest thing in the world for data scientists to do what those insurance companies do. To look at all those hidden patterns and correlations and build a model with all of that data and say, oh, okay, gosh, the people who said climate is their #1 priority, they had a lot of interesting things in common. And some of it is really, really surprising, and we'll get into it on the next slide. But what's important to realize is when they build these models, they are frighteningly accurate. We built a model in Massachusetts where after we figured out who were the people who really, really cared about environmental issues, and again, we didn't call all 4 million registered voters in Massachusetts. We just called 40,000 folks. But then we looked at all the data points and all the patterns, and then we applied that, and what we did was we assigned a score from 0 to 100, every person in Massachusetts, telling us how likely they were to not just care about climate change and the environment, but listed as one of their top 2 issues. We then tested it by calling a whole bunch of the people who scored really high. 89% of them said climate change is their #1 or #2 issue. 89%. As some context, when you are working for a political campaign and you do what's called an identification or an ID call, so you call someone up, you say, hey, you voting for Hillary Clinton? Oh, great, thanks, have a nice day, boom. Studies have shown that that's usually only about 80 to 85% accurate. So these models are actually more accurate than just calling people up, calling up the entire country and asking them what issues they care about. And these are how political campaigns are identifying who is likely to vote, who is not likely to vote, who is likely to support Hillary Clinton, who's likely to support Donald Trump, who hasn't made up their mind but can still be persuaded. And each of you have individual numbers, and they are frighteningly accurate. So, we found out some interesting things about environmentalists. Now, it's important to realize that no single one of these data points in and of themselves is predictive. Usually we combine a whole bunch of data points together, like a guy who's 40 and lives in Boston and shops at Brooks Brothers and is a registered Democrat, really cares about the environment. You know, we package things together. But we've been finding some interesting things. And the first two things to realize are this. One, demographic data points are not nearly as powerful or predictive as consumer or behavioral data points are. So how young you are actually doesn't help us as much as where you shop. Or what race you are doesn't help us as much. The second thing to realize is this. The stereotypes, I don't know if they were true 5 or 10 years ago, but they certainly ain't true now. It is no longer young, white, wealthy people who care about climate change and care about the environment. A Latino grandmother living in Phoenix is just as likely to care about climate change as one of her top priorities as some hipster in Portland or some yuppie in Boston. So, what are we seeing? Some of this stuff is a no-brainer, right? If we have data saying that you're an agricultural or forestry employee, like yes, you're probably going to care about environmental issues. This is something that we see whenever we lay down one of these models, and we test it, and it's really extraordinary. Regardless of how old you are, regardless, if you now live in a place that no longer has a landline, even if you're 70 years old, that is a really powerful indicator that you strongly care about climate change and other environmental issues. Why? I don't know. I mean, we can guess why. Maybe it has to do with your willingness to accept new technology or something like that. But we see it over and over again. Similarly, we're seeing, and again, what I said before holds true, age groupings aren't that helpful in finding people, but we're seeing a grandmother effect. Women in their late 50s and all throughout their 60s are starting to really, really care about climate change. And to the extent we see anything in age groupings, people, most of the students age here, often don't prioritize climate change as a top issue. But when you get to your mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s, a whole bunch more people do, then it goes down again, in your late 50s, 60s, people start prioritizing it again. We can hypothesize why that is. It's not a terribly useful thing to go through, but we are seeing it. Obviously, party affiliation does help predict this, although we're finding lots of independents and moderate Republicans who don't just care about environmental issues, but list it as a top priority. As many as Democrats? No, of course not. But we're finding plenty of Republicans. We are. Other, totally weird things. Again, the key here is to not use your guts. It's to let the data speak to you, build a model, and then test it and test it and test it. If you're a basketball fan, you're much more likely to care about these issues than baseball, hockey, or football fans. I have no idea why. No idea why, but these things pop. Catholics. We haven't been doing this for long enough to know whether this is a Pope Francis effect. We don't know if this is a recent trend. But Catholics, if someone is Catholic, that is a data point that has been proven to help us find folks who care about climate change and environmental issues. People who care about gun control tend to really care about these issues. Obviously, people who exercise a lot, things like that. So environmentalists aren't necessarily who you think they are. The stereotypes are often silly because they rely on broad demographic information and things like that that actually aren't helpful at all. But, oddly enough, the few demographic indicators that do have some power, Latinos care about climate change more than any other ethnic group. Poor people now care about climate change, air quality, water quality much more than people in middle class or upper class families. So the stereotypes really no longer hold true. And if you're a practitioner, if you're a nonprofit or a political campaign trying to find people who really care about these issues, demographic indicators aren't going to help you nearly as much as this stuff does. And if you're a political campaign, this is how these campaigns are finding you. Remember, some of you might be targeted by certain campaigns. Maryland is odd for presidential purposes because it's not often in play, but there's a Senate race going on here. Senate campaigns might target you, but not your roommate, because of all of this data that they've crunched, and because of certain scores that they've assigned to you in their version of the voter file that tells them you are still persuadable. Or maybe they already have a really good feeling that you're going to support their candidate, but you're not a very good voter. So they're going to hold off until a few days before the election and then really bother you with a whole bunch of messaging that's designed to get you to vote. And that brings me to the third thing, because that's what we do at the Environmental Voter Project. We don't care about identifying people who we can persuade to care about the environment. We've already found people who care about the environment. Remember? We found almost 16 million of them who didn't vote last time there was a midterm election, and over 10 million who didn't vote in the last presidential. We know these people are dyed-in-the-wool super environmentalists, and we know that they don't vote. Why? Because who you vote for is secret, and whether you vote or not is public information. So all we care about is getting them out the door to vote, to address this turnout problem, and make these priorities pop on these likely voter polls, because that affects what policy is made. And if talking about brownies got them to vote, we would talk about brownies. All we care about is getting them out the door. And here's the really interesting thing. We never, ever talk about the environment. For a pretty good reason. It does no good in getting environmentalists to vote. We don't talk about the environment because it doesn't work in getting them to vote. So let's go to the third part of this, and that is how campaigns, and to a certain extent nonprofits, now get people to vote. Because this is another thing that has really revolutionized politics over the last, I'd say, 10 years. Up until about 10 years ago, behavioral scientists and political scientists and people who spend a lot of time talking about what gets someone to take a particular action thought that the act of voting was essentially a rational, self-interested choice. It was what they thought was something called rational choice theory. Essentially, a citizen would vote after making a cost-benefit analysis. They thought if the value that they get out of voting, so chances are if you really want someone to win, you see some value in that. You think, oh, if my candidate wins, then she'll do X, Y, and Z, and that will make me happier. That will make the following great things happen. That's the value you get out of voting. If that's greater than the cost of voting, then these theorists thought, okay, well, people will walk out the door and vote. And there actually aren't too many costs associated with voting, right? It's not that hard once you're registered. It is hard for some people to register, unfortunately. Once you're registered, it's not that hard. It takes the average American 20 minutes to vote. But you do need to discount this, right? You need to discount the value by your probability of affecting the outcome, right? Because you can't guarantee your candidate is going to win simply by voting, right? A whole bunch of other people are doing the same thing in voting. So you need to discount your value by the likelihood that your one vote is going to make a difference. And let me tell you something. It is really hard to read any study on voter turnout without seeing the following sentence. There is a higher likelihood that you will get hit by a car on the way to your polling place than there is that your one vote will affect the outcome of the election. And come on, deep down we all know this, right? I mean, it is extraordinarily unlikely that your one vote will ever be the deciding vote in an election. Extraordinarily unlikely. And so, the value of voting is never going to outweigh the cost of voting. Not because the costs are high, they're really low. But there's almost no chance that you will affect the outcome of the election. Yet, tons of people vote. I mean, 4 years ago, 129 million people voted in the presidential election. I mean, for some of the older people who have been registered to vote, I mean, did any of you vote in 2012 in Maryland in the presidential election? Yeah? I mean, there was a Senate race where everybody knew who was going to win. There was a presidential race where everybody knew who was going to win in Maryland. Yet you voted. I mean, why on earth did you vote? That's the better question to ask, right? Why on earth did you vote? Well, the reason is that actually studies have shown that this is totally wrong. People don't vote because they make some cost-benefit analysis where the transaction of voting is going to give them some return that's greater than the cost. We're not rational actors when it comes to voting. Chances are the reason you voted is because you want to live in a civically engaged society, where you've built a personality for yourself, where you want to be civically engaged. Or you'd be embarrassed to admit to your friend or your spouse that you didn't vote, or something like that. But what we've realized is that the act of voting is more about expressing something about who you are rather than some transaction. And it sounds kind of fluffy, but it's anything but, and I'll get into what this means. But for the time being, if we abandon rational choice theory, it means this is what you don't want to do when trying to get someone to vote. You don't want to say, oh, well, you really care about Donald Trump winning, so you've got to vote because it increases the likelihood of him winning. No. I've already gone through, that's not how people think. Similarly, if someone really cares about the environment, we've run tests. Talking to them about the environment and the importance of an election for the environment does nothing. Doesn't increase turnout at all. Instead, if we think of voting as who you are and what type of person you want to be, what social scientists refer to as expressive choice theory, these are extraordinarily powerful messages. And they take advantage of things like peer pressure and social pressure. And I'll give you a set of examples. And I really like these two examples in part because I lived them. 12 years ago, working on John Kerry's presidential campaign, as a lowly volunteer, and we were doing at the time what was state-of-the-art voter turnout stuff, and it went something like this. Barry, you've got to vote on Tuesday. Turnout's going to be low. The election's going to be really close, and your vote's going to make a difference. Now that is a mathematically accurate statement, right? If turnout is low, so if the denominator is small, then Barry's one vote in the numerator has a higher likelihood of making a difference, right? So telling someone the turnout's going to be low and that their vote is going to make a difference is completely accurate. Study after study has shown that that message depresses turnout by 2%, which is a big deal in this business. It depresses turnout. If instead you flip the script and we say, hey Barry, everybody's voting on Tuesday. You've got to vote. Well, denominator's bigger now, right? Barry's one vote in the numerator has a much lower likelihood of making a difference. That message increases turnout by 1.5%. How many states do you think are going to be decided by less than 1.5% on Tuesday? A bunch of them. It's a big number. And the reason is this. It's not about, at least when it comes to getting someone out the door, it's not about trying to convince them of the value of their vote. It's talking to who they are and how they express themselves. And that's why we never talk about the environment. It doesn't work. Whereas rational choice theory would say, hey, talk about low turnout. No, talk about high turnout. It increases turnout. Instead of saying it's important to vote because, this sounds simple, it sounds silly, but it works. You talk about them. Be a good voter. It's about who you are and who you want to be. Do you want to be a good voter? Everybody's voting. I mean, you guys will never, ever leave high school. Peer pressure always works, I guarantee it. It always works. Everybody like you is voting. We know whether you vote or not. This might sound odd, but campaigns use this. I'll give you some examples. One is something that's used all the time. If any of you have volunteered for campaigns, maybe you've done it yourself. You go up to a voter, say, hey, do you intend to vote on November 8th? Oh, you do? Would you mind just signing a pledge card saying that you're going to vote? Okay, great. And then you mail that pledge card back to them right before the election. Now, campaigns aren't doing that because people actually need the reminder. They're doing that to shove that person's promise back in their face. It increases turnout 4% if you collected the pledge over the phone, 6% if it was at someone's door. Those are big numbers. You want something that really works. It's a bunch of experiments started about a decade ago by an academic up in Michigan. I always forget whether he was at Michigan State or University of Michigan. With social pressure mail. And this is the stuff that gets really kind of invasive and Orwellian, but it works. Send someone a letter that says the following. Dear Barry, just wanted to remind you who you vote for is secret, but whether you vote or not is public information. We have included a copy of your voting history below that says when you did and didn't vote. There's an election coming up on Tuesday. We hope that you will be a good voter, and we will follow up after the election to ask you about your experience at the polls. In a large experiment, that was shown to increase turnout over 6%. Now the next year, this guy tweaked the experiment a bit. Sent a whole bunch of letters, this is an academic, sent a whole bunch of letters to people that essentially said the same thing, but with one twist. Said, Barry, want to remind you, who you vote for is secret, whether you vote or not is public information, here's a copy of your voting history. After the election, we are going to send an updated voting report card to you and all of your neighbors. We hope that you are a good voter on November 8th, blah, blah, blah. Well, people went nuts, right? I mean, people went totally nuts when they got these letters. Like, oh, who is this guy who's going to out me to my neighbors and tell them whether I'm a good voter or a bad voter? Oh my God. And the hue and cry was so awful that this guy ended up not sending out the letters. The university said, like, you can't do this. This is absolutely awful. But the voters didn't know that this guy wasn't going to send out the letters. It increased turnout 14.1%. 14.1%. This is not just academic. Hillary Clinton and Ted Cruz used versions of those letters in the Iowa caucuses. Every campaign, every presidential campaign, in the primaries and caucuses and in general, are using pledges. They're using versions of this social pressure stuff because it works. I'll go through some very, very quick examples of some stuff that we did just in a local election around Boston. This was a digital campaign that we ran. I won't get into how we knew this, but we were targeting people online who we knew were environmentalists who didn't vote. And we can get into exactly how we do that, but believe me, it's really scary. Simply said, be a good voter on April 12th. Didn't mention anything about the environment. Hey, who you vote for is private, whether you vote is public record. These are things that people would see popping up. Really simple, animated stuff. Your neighbors are voting on April 12th, will you? And it's a little fuzzy, but we had a voting report card that we sent to people. We also were able to do a big mail merge and crunch numbers and tell people, hey, based on previous election records, 29 people on your street we think are going to vote on Tuesday. Our digital campaign boosted turnout 6.5%. The letter alone boosted turnout 6.7%. This stuff is really powerful. If you don't think 6.7% is a big deal, ask Al Gore how big a deal 6.7% is. It's everything in this business. Everything. So these are the tools that we are using, but also that modern political campaigns are using to identify people who are likely to support them, or likely to support their candidate, or likely to support the environment. And these are some of the messages that they're using to get them to vote. And in closing, before we get to the question and answer, I want to just say a few very, very important things. Please, please, do not leave this presentation and be downcast. Sometimes people say, oh my gosh, I just heard that 15 million plus environmentalists don't vote, and this is awful, and we're all going to burn up, and isn't this awful? No. This is extraordinarily good news. If I told you we did tons of research and found out that nobody cares about climate change, that would be really bad news. But we found the opposite. We found that there's a silent green majority. We found that there are tons of people who actually care about climate change and other environmental issues as one of their top 2 issues. The problem is they're not voting. And that's good news, because changing habits is so much easier than changing minds. So much easier. This is like showing up to a basketball game and realizing all of your best players are sitting in the stands. You just need to throw a uniform on them, and you will win the game. We have found them. We just need to tweak their habits a bit. Just need to get them to vote. The second thing I want you to remember about all of this is coming back to that one thing that I keep on repeating. Whether you vote or not is public information, and every campaign knows this. And what this means is that your vote is far more powerful than you think. Far more powerful. The reason you should care about voting is not because of the incremental bump in likelihood that you might get for your favored candidate. No. Regardless of whether your candidate ever wins in any election, voting is important, because by voting, you get a bright red beacon on your public voter file that every policymaker, local, state, and federal, sees. Every single one of them. And as we discussed at the beginning, all politicians care about are voters. So simply by being a voter, even if you write in your own name every time, you are becoming a part of a select group. You are becoming a first-class citizen. And unfortunately, it's a very select group. If we talk about 2014, I think in 2014, there were 235 million people of voting age. 222 million of them were eligible to vote, because in many states, convicted felons cannot vote. As of about a week ago, there are 200 million registered voters. Okay, so there are a lot of people who can be registered but aren't. In 2012, 129 people voted. 129 million people voted. 2014 midterms, 83 million people voted. 83 million out of the 222 million who are eligible to vote. Those 83 million decide environmental policy. None of the others do. Those 83 million decide all policies. None of the others do. So that's the second thing I want you to take away from this. Your being a voter is extraordinarily important. Not because of voting for the right person, although that's obviously important. Who we elect is important. But also because that gives you entry into the marketplace, the only marketplace that politicians care about. As I said before, Starbucks doesn't care about you if you don't drink coffee. Well, politicians don't care about you if you don't vote. I'm not being cynical, it's just the way campaigns have to be run because of their limited time and limited money. But when you become a voter, they will target you, they will talk to you, they will care about the things that you care about, they will poll you. And especially if you care about the environment, that's so important. Because right now, most environmentalists express themselves by eating a certain way, or riding their bike, or putting solar panels on the roof. But they ain't voting. And if we show up, it's game over. I mean, if we all wake up tomorrow morning and the front page of the New York Times said that likely voters in the upcoming presidential election listed climate change and the environment as their #2 priority, the whole world would change. I don't care who's elected president. I don't care who controls the Senate. The whole world would change. Like that. Because this is a fairly responsive marketplace. The people who supply the product, the people who make political policy, spend all their time measuring what the marketplace wants. And when they find out, they fall over themselves to deliver it to them. But you're only in the marketplace if you vote. So that's all the politicians care about. So, if you're here because you care about environmental issues, if you're here because of this environmental citizenship program, I would humbly suggest that one of the highest forms of environmental citizenship is voting in every election. Every election. Local elections, state elections, federal elections. Not just because of who you can elect, but because by being a voter, that will immediately show up, and policymakers will say, oh, there are a whole bunch of people who care about the environment who are now voting, and we need to respond accordingly. So, thank you guys, thank you so much. I'd love to have lots of questions. I'm going to be here for a Q&A session, but thank you so much.
So let's open up the floor for conversation and figure out how to turn on the lights. You know?
Any questions? Yes, in the back there.
What do you mean behind the lag between the 20s and 50s? What's that after?
The Latin, oh, you mean people caring about the environment?
Yeah.
So for people who didn't hear the question, he asked, I brought up that people in their late 20s, early 30s tend to really start caring about climate change and the environment, and then there are fewer people who care about it, and that late 50s, early 60s, late 60s start caring about it. The honest answer is we don't know. We don't know. But we have some ideas. And that is that people don't stop caring about the environment. It's that it becomes a lower priority because they start prioritizing other things. They have kids, care much more about economic issues, they care much more about a school district and education issues, things like that. People tend to get a little bit more conservative when they get older. Not always, but oftentimes. And then when your kids move away and you start caring about grandchildren and what kind of planet you might leave for them, maybe it becomes a higher priority. This is, the reason I bring this up is we're seeing it in some focus groups that we do, which can get you some information like that. But the honest answer is we don't know. We don't know for sure, but what we do know is that applying those age groups as indicators helps us find these people. Helps us find them. Other questions? Yeah?
Do you have any vote for confidence that these numbers might change after the upcoming presidential election?
Yes. Yes. So, when you run a campaign, it's really hard to measure your effectiveness, right? Because of the first part of the sentence that I wanted to burn into your skulls, and that is, who you vote for is secret. Like, it's really hard to know if the letter I sent to you got you to vote a certain way, because I'm not allowed to see how you voted. It's really hard to measure that stuff. It's really hard to measure the effectiveness of a campaign. But what we do, you can measure every step of the way. When we identify environmentalists, we can call them up and say, hey, what's your #1 political priority? Oh, climate change? Yeah, we thought so. Boom. And test how well we are identifying these people. And then to get to your question, the second thing we can test is whether these people vote or not. And the reason we can test that is whether you vote or not is public information. So what we do is we run large experiments whenever we're mobilizing environmentalists. They're called randomized control experiments. And at its most basic, it works like this. Let's say we find 800,000 environmentalists who don't vote in Florida. Well, we don't message to all 800,000 of them. Before we talk to any of them, we take about 100,000 of them and set them aside and never talk to them. Now, these are all environmentalists who don't vote, but we're not going to talk to them because we're running an experiment. Then the remaining 700,000, we pound away at them. We send them all this social pressure mail and send canvassers to their door and ask them to sign pledges and all this stuff. And then election day comes and we have no clue how we did. And then 2 months later, the voter file is updated and we get to see who voted or not. And we compare turnout among the 700,000 we sent messages to and the 100,000 environmental non-voters who were in what's called a control group. The test that we've run this past year, we only launched a year ago. The test that we've run this past year in our proof of concept mobilizations show that just in the last one on Super Tuesday day across Massachusetts, we're now across the country, but in Massachusetts, we were able to boost turnout 5.1%. You know what 5.1% of 15.87 million is? It's over 800,000 brand new environmentalists that we would have added to the electorate if we were a national organization with $30 million. We're not. But I have every confidence that this will work. Every confidence. Because it's actually a fairly simple approach. We're not trying to change anybody's mind. We're just trying to tweak their habits, and we know what works and we know what doesn't work. Now, there are some things we'll never be able to control, right? If there's a terrorist attack right outside this building tomorrow, everybody in this room is going to care more about terrorism than they did today, right? There are lots of things we can't control. But we know all these people are super environmentalists. And we know that we can increase their turnout rates and push them into the electorate. And we're pretty confident, after turning people out for 4 or 5 years in any given state, that we can make climate change and other environmental issues a top 3 issue. Because there are a whole bunch of elections that go on. Every 4 years, with local elections, state elections, federal elections, primaries, and generals, the average person will vote 10 times. Each of those times we're increasing turnout 5%, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. Things can change really quickly. So I'm very optimistic. And I hope all of you are optimistic as well, just to be a little bit broader here. Yes, this stuff is scary. Like if you're scared of climate change, like good, you ought to be. But this is also an extraordinary opportunity. I mean, how many generations have the opportunity to be heroes? I mean, yes, we're the last generation that can do something about this, but like, we can be heroes. Like, this isn't some war against an unbeatable enemy. This isn't some disease that we don't have a cure for. Like, we know the policy solutions to address climate change, clean air, clean water. We know them. We have the technologies. We just need the political will to enact the policies. And there are some pretty efficient ways to get there. So I am extraordinarily optimistic, extraordinarily optimistic. Other questions? Can be about any of the work we do or about any stuff that you're seeing in politics right now, on any campaigns that you have questions about. I'll bring up one thing that I often get asked about, and that is this. Okay, and we won't go too much longer because it's almost 6. Some people often ask, why don't environmentalists vote? And that's a really good question. And maybe some of you are curious about this. This is why I brought it up. And there is an unsatisfying but very true answer, and then a slightly more satisfying answer. The unsatisfying answer is we don't know. As I'm sure we've got some social scientists in the room, as they'll be able to tell you, it's very easy to run an experiment that tells you, hey, if you say this to someone, you can get them to do this. We know how to get people to do things. It's very hard to figure out why someone doesn't take an action. It's very hard. It's hard to figure out why environmentalists don't vote. It's just really hard to measure that with any scientific rigor. And the main reason is people lie. The only way you can find out why someone doesn't take an action is to say, hey, why don't you take this action? And see what they say. And when we poll non-voters, we get some really interesting results. In particular, we ran a large experiment this past winter, talking to hundreds of environmentalists who never miss an election. Super voters. And then we asked the same questions to hundreds of environmentalists who have been registered for years, but have never voted. And these weren't questions about the environment, these were questions about politics, civic engagement, the act of voting, the importance of voting, things like that. 2 things stood out. One, the non-voters gave pretty much the same exact answers as all of the super voters did. Even though these people never voted, they still had the same feelings about civic engagement and voting and the political process as the super voters did. But the second thing was really interesting. We asked all of the non-voters, when you don't vote, what is the reason for you not voting? Well, the overwhelming majority of them said, oh no, I always vote. Now remember, whether you vote or not is public information. You were working off a voter file. We know these people were lying. The overwhelming majority of people who have never, ever voted before said, oh no, I always vote. And we thought they might say this, so we actually had a backup question afterwards that said, oh, okay, well, like, we know you vote most of the time, which is a lie, like, we knew that they never voted, but, like, when you, on the rare occasion that you vote, you know, what's your reason for not voting? We wanted to figure out why aren't environmentalists voting? A slightly smaller majority, but still a majority, said, no, you don't get it. I always vote. They were lying their pants off. Now that does give us a hint as to why environmentalists aren't voting, and it tells us another interesting thing. What it tells us is these people who aren't voting are not completely checked out of the system. They still buy into the societal norm that being a voter is a good thing. They still wanted a complete stranger over the phone or at their door to think that they were a voter. It would have been really easy he'd be like, I don't know, I just never vote, I'm lazy. But they didn't want to say that. Or they didn't want to say, oh, the system's all rigged. They could have said a whole bunch of things, but they didn't. They lied. And we know they lied. They said, oh no, I vote like all the time. And the second thing that tells us is why social pressure works so well. Because even people who don't vote want their neighbors and people like them to think that they vote. It's still a societal norm that we buy into. And so this is why campaigns and nonprofits and other organizations are starting to take advantage of this. They're using these messages, and over the next 6 days until the polls close, 6 days and 2 hours, hundreds of millions of Americans are going to be getting social pressure messages like this. And they're going to be targeted in ways using hundreds of data points that help campaigns to individually target people. So, it's now 6. I'm going to have plenty of time to stick around if people want to come up afterwards and ask me questions. I'd love to meet all of you, but thank you. Thank you again so much for coming.
2 more quick things. One, anyone who wants to continue the conversation with Nathaniel and join us for a catered dinner on campus at 6:30, we have 2 spots at the dinner table. Please come up and see me afterward. First 2 folks have 2 spots to join us for dinner at 6:30.
Jump fast.
Jump fast. The second thing is, I think you all would agree that Nathaniel and his organization are doing very good and important work in this world, and we in the Environmental Studies program at St. Mary's and at St. Mary's College in general want to make sure that he is in a good position to continue that work, whether that means keeping him well hydrated or well caffeinated. And so we have a tradition in this speaker series of presenting our speakers with a St. Mary's coffee mug.
Thank you.
So again, join me in thanking Nathaniel.